Laurie, welcome. Thank you for being on.
Thank you so much for having me, Jessica.
Yes, I am excited to connect with you and learn more about you. So I'll start at the beginning of yoga for you. When did you first find yoga and how did it impact your life?
Okay, so as many white Western yoga practitioners, I found yoga through the physical aspect. I think that was the interest in it as at first was the asana, the postures. It was the late 90s. I was in college and I was quite into fitness activities, worked at a recreation center. And so it just seemed logical to try. So I started with some Rodney Yee VHS tapes.
Yes,
That
I
was
remember
kind of
those.
those 20-minute VHS tapes would start some of my mornings. And then I remember my first yoga class was in New York City. My sister was living in New York City at the time, and I would visit her each year. And she was starting to get into yoga. So I attribute, all of this to her.
Hmm.
um, and she took me to a class that she had been attending, and it was in an attic space in Astoria. I'm quite sure it was summertime and hot, or springtime and really hot, and like upstairs space, cramped. And I just remember having a different experience of yoga at that point than I had had with the videos. And I can just describe it as kind of coming home. It felt like, oh, this feels not like something new, but just something that fits and something needed and something that kind of not only at that point was a physical experience, but a mental, emotional, and spiritual one as well. So that was the beginning. And so that was college time. I'm sure I was doing many things, and yoga was just one of them. And so I kind of just dabbled in it. And then I moved to St. Louis a few years later. And at that time, like studios were beginning to crop up. And one moved into my neighborhood. And so I started going to a weekly class. And again, just kind of felt like this is needed, like I can't walk away from this. This is something that's needed. And it's interesting how it felt kind of like, yeah, just aligned with who I was. It was kind of like, oh, like something gets me, if that
Hmm.
makes sense.
Mhm.
Again, encompassing the physical and emotional and spiritual aspects, and just connection in general, like to connect with a community that kind of had similar views and ideals was just really valuable at, I think, a critical time of my life. So yeah, so from that, it kind of grew into a more daily practice, from a weekly to a daily practice, and just kind of has really infiltrated all aspects of my life, from the way that I um, view myself and view the world, the way that I interact with others. Of course, it's defined all of my work in more ways than being a yoga teacher. And yeah, so I can't really imagine what my life would look like if yoga had not been a part of it at that time.
Yeah, that's such a beautiful story. And I think so many people can relate to that feeling of coming home that you get at some point. Not everyone has it in their first class. A lot of people do, actually, that I talk to. They do have a moment of like, wow, this feeling, it's that comfort, it's that feeling, that safety. So I think that's such a beautiful story. And I'm so glad you found it early on in your life as well. I think we all need it. The earlier, the better. That's why
Yes,
I talk about kids yoga.
exactly.
Now,
Mhm.
when did you decide that you wanted to share yoga with children?
Yeah. So I went through my only 200-hour yoga training, about, I don't know, about 7 years after I started practicing yoga. And that was not something that I intended to do. This was, a practice, again, something that I felt I needed for myself, and how I, again, interacted with the world. But I had a friend at the time who was opening a shop, and in the basement of this shop was a space, and he said, "You're going to teach yoga there." I'm like, "Well, I don't teach yoga. That's not something that I do." But it kind of like planted a seed, I think. And shortly after that, one of the first trainings, yoga teacher trainings, came to St. Louis, and it was at a place I was teaching aerobics at the time at a university rec center. And my teacher, my first yoga teacher, Jaime Sanchez, offered a training there. And as an employee, I was able to get a discount. So it was kind of like all the stars aligned. So I started teaching and finished that training in 2004. So alongside my yoga, I've always worked with kids. So since I was a kid, I babysat, as a teenager. My undergraduate degree was in elementary education. I worked at before school, after school, and summer programs all through college, as well as volunteer tutoring and such. And then after college, I taught middle school for a couple of years before moving into social work, where I also worked with kids. So kind of along with all of that work, as I started to become a yoga practitioner and then a yoga teacher, I would also start to share it with kids that I worked with. And at first it was again, mostly the postures, like here's some fun, shapes that we can do in our bodies. And at that time, I think kind of aligned with when research was starting to come out on the benefits, not only the physical, but the mental health benefits of yoga and mindfulness in particular. And I see yoga as a mindfulness practice, as well as a state of being. So it all just kind of came together. I started to see, as I would share yoga with kids that I worked with, that they enjoyed doing it. It was, again, something fun that they could do. And there was also like a noticeable shift in terms of navigating strong emotions. So in that, again, that kind of was a common thread of offering yoga in spaces that I worked, but keeping in a sense, keeping yoga separate. I was teaching, 1 or 2 classes for adults a week, and doing full-time educational work or social work jobs. And then at some point, it was 2012, I left a full-time social work job, just thinking like, I don't know how, but I know that I do want to make sharing yoga and mindfulness with kids a bigger part of my life and my work. And so at that point, I was lucky enough to have connected and built a friendship and a working relationship with the owner of a studio here in St. Louis called Urban Breath Yoga. So Kathleen Williams owns that studio, and she knew of my interests, and I had been working with her as a teacher, and she said, well, I can offer you a little bit more work. And together we built what is now the Oxygen Project. So which is a nonprofit in St. Louis that brings yoga into schools and youth agencies. So at that time, Kathleen allowed that work, the yoga for youth classes, to be part of the yoga studio's work. And then as it grew, it became noticeable that it needed to be its own entity. So I always attribute that, of course, the building of the organization to it was not just that seed in my mind, but Kathleen's actual let's make it happen, and putting the resources behind it, as well as giving it the name that the organization has. So
so what kind of work, so what year was that the Oxygen Project was founded?
So it was around 2014.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it was 2014 that we started doing some youth yoga classes through Urban Breath Yoga, the studio that Kathleen owns, that I work with as well. And then in 2016, the Oxygen Project became a nonprofit entity. So standing on its own.
Got it. Okay. So over the last 5 years or so, how has the work developed and changed, and what kind of classes and opportunities are you offering children?
Mhm. It's changed a lot, especially in the past year and a half, as
Oh
many
yeah.
things have changed in
I
the
wonder
past.
why.
So when we began in 2014, again, it was kind of just a small offering that, the yoga studio would get requests for outreach. Again, this is at a time when research was out there, people were recognizing that yoga is not just this thing that's valuable in a studio setting, but we want to offer, we want to put it out there in the world. So Kathleen had that goal, and I had the experience with working with kids, and kind of came together. So we offered just a couple of classes to begin with in a couple of schools. As a social worker, I was able to be am able to be a field instructor, which means we had a social work practicum student who helped us a lot in those that first year, like building programming, building the systems for that programming to be offered. So our goal with the Oxygen Project was not only to offer like a one-time fun yoga class for kids, although we hope it's fun too, but to recognize the needs, particularly in St. Louis, which has a high rate of low-income families, especially in the St. Louis public school area. A lot of trauma based on racial issues, systemic racism. So we wanted to really allow yoga and mindfulness to be a tool for kids, as you mentioned, like the earlier the better, because then they become life skills, to be a tool for kids to manage the effects of trauma and chronic stress. And so we have always had a focus of working in under-resourced areas, in particular St. Louis City, and have had a focus of offering yoga and mindfulness classes, although like in a fun way and developmentally and age-appropriate way, in order to teach kids skills and social emotional wellness and navigating the impact and strong emotions that come with trauma and chronic stress. So how it's changed is we've gotten bigger. We started out again uh, with, we started out not a nonprofit, and then we did, eventually move into nonprofit status, which meant we have a board. We started as a board of 3, and now we've grown to a board of 12 of amazing individuals who have backgrounds in not only teaching yoga and practicing yoga, but also in social work, in nonprofit development, in counseling, in higher ed, in mindfulness, and particularly mindfulness for regarding racial issues. So we have built a beautiful, strong, skillful board, as well as a group of amazing teachers. So as the program has grown, so it went from myself and a practicum student at the time, LA, teaching the classes. And then as we developed, we brought on more teachers. So we have, over the few years, worked with an amazing group of teachers who have experience, not only experience in training, teaching yoga, but also what we feel is most important is that experience working with kids, and particularly with kids living in low-income areas and managing, again, those effects of trauma. So our
Mm.
teachers are trained in trauma-sensitive teaching practices and have experience working in areas in which that's prevalent. So yeah, we've grown from more board members
Mhm.
and teachers, and we now have a staff, an employed staff of 1 at this point. Um, And we've grown in partnerships. We've had the privilege to work with partners now for 3 or 4 years. We have a few charter schools in the city that we've worked with for a few years. We've have a relationship, an ongoing relationship with St. Louis County Family Court System, and that programming is continuing to change and grow. We've worked with St. Louis Public Schools. We've worked with a number of public schools in the county. In St. Louis, there's a city and county as two main counties, and then a number of municipalities in the counties, each with their own separate school district. So we've grown in terms of those partnerships, and as well as I think just in our visibility through the work of our board members and our teachers and their networks. The word has gotten out that we are an organization with this offering, and schools are starting to really see the value. I think when I started teaching yoga in general and to teaching with kids, it was seen as like, oh yeah, that's a fun thing if you want to do it. And now it's more, yes, we are looking for kind of outside the box resources for kids navigating the effects of trauma and stress. Especially in this past year, we have past year or so, we have definitely seen schools and youth agencies really seeking out ways to help kids in of all ages to manage the impact. I think we often see kids as resilient, which they are, and also not really, we don't see them show the effects of stress and trauma that we might see adults demonstrate. And so we might think there can be a tendency to think that it's not affecting them, that we can protect them, right? But kids, as we've seen the past year and a half, especially, kids are picking up on that. And even if they're not saying like, I'm stressed from, and I've actually, heard a number of kids say, I'm really stressed because of what's going on in the world. I'm scared for my health and my family's health. I'm scared, for my community in terms of the, racial injustices and such. So I think that as a school and educational communities are really starting to recognize that and allow for resources that will help kids in managing the impact, especially this past year and a half.
Yeah, it's so wonderful that you had this in place prior to all of this happening. I think before the pandemic as well, obviously, there's such a need for trauma sensitive yoga for children, for adults, for everybody. But now the fact that it's in place and has been functioning for a few years, and now you were able to kind of, transform into what needed to be done during the pandemic. I think that's really, really important. What has been the greatest challenge in creating the oxygen project and like kind of sustaining it I would say in the last year and a half? I'm sure there's lots of challenges, but what has been the biggest challenge for you?
Yeah, in particular in the last year and a half, as many organizations have done, we've had to pivot our programming. We've done the virtual in many aspects, and we've found, some successes with that. I'm always amazed at how, as adults, oftentimes we're like, oh, this isn't going to work. And then it does because the kids make it work. And they're just so happy to connect that, they make it work. So we've definitely, that's been a challenge just in like offering our programming in different ways, on different platforms. And, as yoga teachers and maybe educators, we're not particularly skilled at technology all the time. So that's definitely been a challenge. And then kind of an ongoing challenge is, anytime you're working with school systems, which have, specific ways of working, based on a number of years of operating in that way. When something new is being offered, even if it's seen as quite valuable and needed, it's always a challenge in navigating with the school administrators and teachers how that's going to fit into these traditional systems. So we see a lot of challenges, and just in terms of like, can we devote resources like money to this type of programming? Are we ready to, actually, value that type of service for kids with dollars? Are we able to change instructional time to prioritize the yoga and mindfulness programming during the school day, which is really our goal? We do after school programming and family programming in the evenings, but ideally we want to be a part of a kid's regular school day. And one thing about the Oxygen Project that might be different than other resources offered in schools is we're not working with we're not pulling out kids who have a specific issue or diagnosis. We're working with whole groups of kids. So our teachers go into student classrooms and offer programming to the whole group. So our goal is really to allow these practices to be a part of every kid's school day so that they can become reliant on it, because we know that these practices are valuable when they are consistent. When we have an opportunity to practice the techniques like breath work and meditation, in calm times, we know that we can use them in times of need and times of stress and chaos. So that's what we want to offer to kids. So that's kind of an ongoing challenge as schools navigate, like, well, we have to get a certain number of minutes in math, for example. So how are we going to fit this into the school day? So we have definitely seen a lot of interest and valuing of yoga and mindfulness programming at this point. But what gets a little sticky is, but how? How are we going to implement it?
Yeah, and that's over and over again when I talk to people, I think we're all in agreement. The way to get yoga to all children is during the school day, in school, having it integrated within the curriculum, because then the value is seen, every child is being reached. It's not just children in after school, or which is also great, but just even seeing it as part of their day makes them realize there's value to it. And then, as you said, the consistency is really what, when we then start feeling and seeing the effects of it. So yeah, I totally understand. I mean, you're so not alone in that struggle right now, where it's like there is science behind it, there is research behind it, so people are like, oh, there is something to it. People are a little bit more aware and understanding of yoga and mindfulness, but it's still a hard road to kind of, I mean, we're trying to get into a system that's been in place for so long. So
Exactly.
yeah. So well, but it's so great to hear about the work you're doing, and it's just so important. So I'd love to hear also the rewards of it. So I'm sure there's many rewards for you. What has been the greatest reward for you so far in doing this work?
Yeah, I think in general, in working with kids, I think why I've always navigated and enjoyed working with kids, and why I've loved sharing yoga with kids, is that those moments when, even without prompting, they let you know how the practices are impacting their life. So I've had kids say, "Oh, when I was really mad at my sister, I did that alternate breath." And so then I was okay. I didn't hit her. Like, that's a huge win.
Huge.
That's
Yes,
a huge
huge.
win. Or I was upset with a teacher, and I did that breath and nobody knew I was doing it at my desk. So these moments that they connect the dots, and we do make those connections, help them to make those connections in classes, like you might use this when you're feeling such and such. Um, but the kids really connect the dots. It's like they know when they will need it. So it's those are the rewards to me when kids actually express that they have used it. Just I taught my dad how to do this meditation or this posture. That's huge. I remember working years ago. I volunteered teaching a class at the St. Louis City Juvenile Detention Center, and it was a rotating, of course, group of girls who would come in each week. And each week, because we had some girls who had been there the previous week and some who were new, I would have those who had been there kind of tell the others, what is yoga about? And what's your opinion of yoga? And um, although those classes never looked like a typical yoga class, I found them to be so so rewarding to be in that setting, and with those girls in particular. But one day I was asking the girls who had been there the previous week, maybe 2 weeks, to share what they thought of yoga to a couple of new girls. And one said, kind of under her breath, she said, yoga is the peace you find in yourself. I was like, what did you say? She said, yoga is the peace you find in yourself. And those were never words I had used, but that's what she felt. And I always find it interesting that even the kids who might not seem to be paying attention, might not seem to be enjoying things one bit, they're taking what they need, and finding a value to their life. So those types of comments are a huge reward to me. Yeah.
That's so beautiful. I'm like, I couldn't express that any better. That's absolutely it. Um, and I do want to just make note. I apologize, everyone. I've got my landscaper outside, so in and out are coming noises. We've got a dog and a cat that are jumping in. So just want to acknowledge everyone. But yeah, those unprompted moments where they tell you that they integrated it, it's always that feeling of like, see, now they've got it, they have it within them, and they could take it with them. And that's why we do what we do. We're planting these seeds, and then to hear that they're like, they understand, it gives me chills every time I hear these stories.
Yeah.
Well, I'd love to just pivot a little bit into I think yoga encompasses very much that we take care of ourselves first in order to share it with others. So I was curious to hear from you how you've been caring for yourself, especially in this last pandemic year and a half that we've been all trying to navigate. What are some ways that you've taken care of yourself?
Yeah. So as an introvert and a
Mm.
bit of a homebody, there have been aspects of the past year and a half that I've appreciated, in terms of the kind of the permission to slow down and do less and be more quiet. Those are, honestly, like rather comfortable places for me. Um, but I think, a personal lesson that I've learned this past year and a half is that rest is needed, that slowing down is needed, even when we're not forced to take it, like that is necessary to any work with anyone else, with others. um, so I've kind of just really embraced that aspect of being more still, more quiet, taken longer walks. I live close to one of the largest parks, or maybe the largest park well, not the largest, but in my opinion, the most beautiful park in St. Louis, called Tower Grove Park. So I'm there almost every day, and that became like really a haven for me, to connect with nature in that way, and with myself. I've been reading more books, for pleasure. I've been taking more baths, and I've found, I'm lucky to really have a great support system in terms of family and friends, and particularly friends who are also in the world of yoga and in the world of social work. So we very much share beliefs and values, and so that's been a huge comfort. And finally, I think I've relied more on my yoga and meditation practice. And that's been, you know, this has been a moment where I've been like, what would I have done? Where would I be, if I hadn't built that? So just so much gratitude for that, and all the um, ways I've been kind of encouraged toward that. Yeah.
Yes, yes. The things that we teach that we're able to then, I mean, really live. I mean, I think we've been living this lifestyle, but like it's really put to the test when we are in this time in our history.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm so glad you found those ways to take care of yourself. I'd love to wrap up with your kids yoga gem. So I always ask at the end if you can give one piece of advice to people sharing yoga with children, what would that be?
Mhm. I would say let them guide. I think sometimes we, in education and in of any kind, and teaching yoga included, we have these grand plans, and we have specific outcomes, and we very much that are very valuable, to those that we work with, and we want to stick to that plan, and we want to achieve that outcome, whatever it might be. And in that, we can sometimes have the potential to miss out on opportunities, to really connect. So I think when I have in mind, like, let me just let the kids guide, I'm able to tune into those teachable moments, those moments that weren't planned for, but are quite valuable. I'm thinking of one of our amazing Oxygen Project teachers, Amber, how she's been teaching at one of the charter schools, that we've been working with for a few years now, and she shares with me that sometimes they just talk. It's a group of middle school girls, and they just talk. And within that, she's weaving the lessons of yoga so beautifully, without doing any postures and, anything that really resembles yoga. And I think it's in those moments that kids are connecting to teachers, to each other, and to themselves, through the practice of yoga, even if it doesn't look like a typical yoga class in any way. So yeah, that would be my gem, is let them guide. The kids we work with are like the greatest teachers that we have, and they know what they need, and it's helpful to allow that space, for them to find it with some of our experience guiding as well.
Yes. I love it so much. And it's also something that's very unique to kids yoga classes that we are able to let them guide, because for so much of their day, there's their teacher has to cover certain things, and and they're in a sport and they have to accomplish certain goals. And yoga is a time when we can really let them just be themselves, support them in that. And so
Mhm.
that's really beautiful. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Well, I'd love for people to be able to find you and to be able to find the Oxygen Project. So can you just point us in the direction of your website and social media and all of that?
Yeah. So the Oxygen Project is at oxygenproject.org, and we can be found on Facebook. It's Oxygen Project Yoga for Youth, and on Instagram with the same, Oxygen Project Yoga for Youth. So
Wonderful.
love to connect.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being on and taking the time. It was so great to talk to you.
Oh, it was an honor and a pleasure. Thank you so much for inviting me. And yes, thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
All right, you too.
Thank
Thank you.
you.